Hello BookTube. I'd like to talk today about Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. But before I get started on this book, I'd like to give a quick spoiler warning. You see, I've been thinking about this book, and I've been thinking about what parts of the book work and which parts of the book don't work, and my takeaway is that this is a book which can be a little bit of a slog to get through. It's got some slow parts in it. But there are a few scenes that make up for everything. A few really fantastic scenes which made a big impression on me the first time I read it. And I think would make a big impression on a lot of new readers. And I think these scenes are best appreciated, they get the most impact if you don't know they're coming. And so for that reason, I'm going to give a spoiler warning on this review. If you've not read this book before, it may be best to just stop watching here and go read it and then maybe come back to the review. I'll say a couple brief things before you go though. Number one, like I just said earlier, the book is a bit slow in spots, but it's a small book, all things considered. The edition I had was 246 pages. So it is possible to just persevere through the slow spots. And I think the imaginative scenes in this book make it all worthwhile. Number two, if at all possible, try and get an edition of this book which doesn't spoil those fantastic scenes on the cover. There's a temptation for the publishers or the illustrators to just put all the best scenes illustrated on the cover. And yeah, I know these days it's almost impossible to avoid spoilers for a classic book. But if at all possible, try and get a book with a nondescript cover. And to facilitate that, for the thumbnail of this video, I'm going to try to use a cover of the book, cover illustration of the book, which isn't going to spoil any of the fantastic scenes. And who knows, maybe it'll cost me a couple clicks, but that's just one of the sacrifices I make for you. Okay, now let's get into some spoilers. So I first encountered this story in an abridged version, which was the Great Classics Illustrated. How many people out there remember the Great Classics Illustrated? These were books, they weren't really comic books, but they had text on one page and then an illustration on the other page. And they were always simplified versions of the classics for children. And it's where I first encountered a lot of classic books. You know, at the time, I think I was about in 4th grade or something like that. I didn't think I was reading an abridged version. I thought I was reading the classics, and this was actually the classic book. It's not until I got into adulthood that I realized to myself, okay, you haven't actually read the real Journey to the Center of the Earth. You need to go back and read the real version. But my impression of reading the Great Classics Illustrated version is that there was a lot of boring parts of that book where they were just wandering around in the caves. But then, when they got to the interesting part of the center of the earth, that really made an impression on me. I was captivated by it as a child, and those scenes stuck in my memory long since after. And if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about, and I've already given my spoiler warning, so let's just jump into it. The mushroom forest that was located under the center of the earth, and then when they get to the sea, which is located in the middle of the earth, I thought to myself, wow, isn't this cool to imagine that there could be this whole ocean under the ground. And then, when they're in the sea and the two dinosaurs attack the boat and start fighting with each other, they were the Ichthyosaurus and the Plesiosaurus. Hopefully I'm pronouncing those names right. Classics Illustrated had a great illustration of those two sea monsters fighting with each other, and just this whole prehistoric world which was depicted in this book. I mean, it just fascinated me as a child to imagine that there could be this whole world of forgotten monsters which was just underneath our feet. Now, Jules Verne was operating from a hollow earth theory, which he describes in some detail in the book, Journey to the Center of the Earth, which has nowadays been completely discredited. I mean, we now know, you know, when Jules Verne was writing, we didn't actually know for certainty what was under the Earth's crust. Now we know. So, you know, as fun as it is to imagine all this stuff that might be in the center of the Earth, we now know it's not there. But it's still fun to think back to a time when we didn't know what was under the Earth, and to imagine what, you know, what in some alternative universe could have been in the center of the Earth, maybe. Yeah, I guess nowadays it's less a science fiction story than it is a fantasy story, but it's still fun to imagine. So yeah, that was my takeaway from reading it as a child. As an adult, I thought, okay, child me didn't have the patience for any long descriptions, but as an adult, this should be much easier to read. And on top of that, I had recently read Around the World in 80 Days, which was also by Jules Verne. And that book was a real pleasure to read. That was a funny book, a comical book, and it was something where the narration style was not heavy with long descriptions. It was fast-paced, it was funny, it was a real joy to read. So I approached Journey to the Center of the Earth expecting it to be better than I remembered as a child, but in fact, it still has a lot of long descriptions. So the very beginning starts out all right. There's some humorous interplay between Axel and his uncle, the professor, and what's the name of Axel's love? Greta. And well, when they get their taciturn guide Hans, that's all set up in a rather humorous way. There is a surprising amount of the description of the country of Iceland and its geographic features, which I wasn't expecting to get about a book which is not nominally about Iceland, right? It's about the center of the Earth. But a trip over to Wikipedia shows that part of the inspiration for writing this book was a trip that Jules Verne took to Iceland, and he was impressed by all the geographic features. So that was, it's not obvious from the title of the book, but that was one of the author's reasons for writing this book. Then wandering around in the tunnels was every bit as boring as I had remembered it from a child. I mean, once they actually get to see the exciting things in the center of the Earth, that's all right. But the going through the tunnels, I found that passage to be long, boring, humorless, largely. There was some comic potential of these characters set up in the beginning, but when they were around in the tunnels, I didn't find that to be... I found the humor of the book to be all sucked out. And then we get to the interesting parts, which I mentioned before. Although I do have to say, I think these subterranean wonders are better in my imagination than they are actually in Jules Verne's prose. And like I said, I'm not holding this against him for all of his books. I thought Around the World in 80 Days was very delightful to read. But that battle I was describing earlier between the two sea monsters on the subterranean ocean. You imagine that battle and it looks really cool in your mind. You see illustrations of it, and it looks really fascinating. But when you actually read that passage, the prose is pretty flat. I mean, Jules Verne doesn't do a very good job in that passage of building up the tension. And the mushroom forest as well was something I was expecting to be much better, but it really only got a couple of paragraphs description. And those 2 paragraph descriptions weren't really all that impressive, in my opinion, in the book. Now, I wish I could remember this, but in one of my art classes in middle school, years and years ago, the teacher showed us an illustration of a famous painting, which was an illustration of the mushroom forest from Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. Now, I have wasted I don't know how much time on Google trying to find this, searching for, famous painting, Jules Verne, mushroom forest, Journey to the Center of the Earth, going on Google Images. I'm beginning to think I may have just dreamed this lesson about a famous painting about the mushroom forest. Does anyone out there at all know what I'm talking about? I can't find it. But what you can find if you search Google Images is a lot of other illustrations of the mushroom forest. So, these scenes have obviously given a lot of inspiration to illustrators over the past 200 years or so. But on the page, I don't know, they come off a bit flat. I mean, as a reader, you can fill in the gaps in the descriptions with your imagination, and you can imagine all these fantastical things. And, I guess that's what I did as a child. But on the page, the descriptions just seem a bit flat. At least that's my impression. If you, let me know what you thought. Did you read Journey to the Center of the Earth? What did you think about it? I mean, what did you think about all the time they spent wandering around in the tunnels? Was that at all interesting to you? I mean, was it interesting? Is it just me? And what did you think about them on the subterranean ocean and those dinosaurs fighting each other on the ocean? Did Jules Verne's description of it do it justice? Was he able to bring out the suspense in that, or was his description just a little bit flat? But the idea and the illustration is what sticks with you after you're done reading it. So that's all I've got to say about Journey to the Center of the Earth. Let me know what your thoughts are.